Right. Well, my name is Jessica. The first question we're going to discuss is cultural discourses about mental health, illness. What are the messages that you received in your culture or family of origin about mental health or mental illness?
Um, I can start. Um, my name is Mignon, and I would say in my family of origin, mental health was considered something negative, and to the point where you wouldn't discuss it, like that old, um, like someone's crazy kind of mentality. And it was, if someone was having issues, there really wasn't a discussion about how do you get help. If anything, it was you just toughen up and you work through it. Don't cry. Um, you know, you have to just deal with it and just power through. Was kind of like my family of origin to the point as I am here now, I think back that if it had been part of um, my family's origin, something that we talked about and discussed and we believed in, I think I would have chosen that as a profession a long time ago versus it being later in life when I have more information and I've actually experienced the benefit of seeking out assistance with mental health. So I definitely feel like even today, when I speak to my mother, she is supportive about the career change um, that I'm taking, but she still has this stigma in her mind about it. Like if I recommend to her, which I have recommended to her to seek out seeing a therapist, she still does, oh, I don't need that. I'm fine. I just power through. I can get through whatever's going on. But yeah, I can see and my sister can see how um she hasn't actually accepted some of the things and some of the trauma that's happened to her throughout her life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'll go next. I'm Bryn, and it's interesting. Like my great grandfather was in what they called like, the loony ward or whatever. He obviously had like mental health issues and a couple nervous breakdowns, and they just would admit people at those times to like, mental hospitals and not really address like what their problem was. So I always grew up thinking I had this great grandfather that was psycho and crazy and shouldn't be on the streets. And then fast forward to my mom and dad, my mom dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety. And rather than like looking at maybe some traumatic events that she had, my parents just really looked at from like a chemical standpoint and like figuring out like working with a psychiatrist on getting her on like SSRIs and not really like diving down into maybe perhaps this depression or anxiety was stemming from something from her childhood. So I was kind of raised as looking at like from more like a chemical standpoint rather than like a therapeutic standpoint. And then fast forward, my sister had a crazy eating disorder. And she was almost hospitalized for that. So that's when my parents sort of were open to, okay, we need to speak to a therapist to get help for my sister. But what was unique about that was, insurance sort of covered that because she was diagnosed with this illness. But then they didn't really address how an eating disorder affects the entire family system. So, like, I should have gone to therapy. My dad should have gone to therapy. My mom, like, all of us were affected by this disorder. But we looked at it just like, okay, the person suffering from this should see the therapist. So that's kind of my background of mental health and being open to, you know, therapy and healing in that way. So that's what I have to add.
You,
Hi,
Bryn.
this
I'll go
is
next.
Olivia.
Oh,
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 no,
go ahead,
you go.
Olivia. Okay. Okay. I was going to say I have a similar story to Mignon, like with my family. My mom grew up bouncing around from foster cares, and her mom abandoned her when she was 5 years old. So she has a lot of trauma. that like I'm still learning about to this day. And she just deals with it. And she, like Mignon said, pushes through and gets by. And that's what I grew up witnessing. And that's kind of how I, was taught to deal with problems. And like same with my dad, he lost my uncle at a very young age, and it really affected the whole that side of the family. And no one went to therapy. Nobody even talked about it. And again, I grew up watching that. And it's just like, as an adult, I'm still learning stuff about what they went through. And it's because they never learned how to deal with it and process it. And so therapy was never a thing in my family. They always said they don't need that. We'll get through it. Like we're fine until like they reach their breaking point. Like my mom had a situation where she was dealing with some depression and she finally got help. But that's why I was pushed to go to this, career because I know that they need help and I encourage them to. And I just by me and my husband will talk to them about it and it kind of helps them to kind of process it a little bit more. Um, but I see the help of it and I went through my own stuff when I was a new parent and I didn't know who to reach out to, like mental health services wise, because this is before I was at Kaiser, but I didn't know who to talk to or who to reach out to get help when I felt I needed it until I was at Kaiser. But that's my backstory.
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Olivia, and I have very similar to all of my previous colleagues' comments about growing up in my mom's generation, and my aunts and uncles were big influences on me, and they were very much raised in the like, yeah, we have a lot of trauma, but the way out is to suck it up and go to school, get a degree, be successful, and whatever you got to do that, you need to crawl out of where we're at because where we're at is not desirable. So that was a lot of the messaging that I got was kind of suppressed anxiety, move forward, suck it up, which worked for me until it didn't, which I think that happens for a lot of people that they stick to the way they grew up. Um, and I also feel like there's a lot of shame around mental health issues that where we didn't want to admit that we had these issues going on. So that was another message that I got. And that'll be all I'll contribute on this one. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing, everybody. So again, very similar to you guys. My dad's side of the family, oh my gosh, of the family is very much like that. When I told them what I wanted to do for school, my grandfather said, "So you want to be a shrink?" And the mentality is very much just not, I mean, it's changed since I've been in school. They're very much supportive of it, but they just don't really, it's just kind of the suck it up mentality, just push through. And then my mom's side is very different. She was always like, if you need to talk to somebody, I can find somebody. And I was like, no. So I, I totally get where you guys are at because my dad's side is very much like that. So.
Thank you everybody for sharing here. I'll read the next part. Um, Awareness of resources. What resources were you aware were available for mental health, if any, when you were growing up prior to pursuing your MFT degree? If you were not aware of mental health resources earlier in life, what are your thoughts about that?
I can start with that. I was never really aware of any resources. Like I thought that that's like what affluent people did. Like they went to therapy. Like if you had money, like you saw a therapist or you had like a psychologist or whatever, like regular people or, middle class people like that didn't have access to that. That was my view growing up. Unless you had some crazy, disease or diagnosis, would you be able to like be a normal person going to see like a therapist? So I mean, now obviously being in school, I've like realized all of like the, different resources and access to mental health care. But that was my view growing up and then before like kind of entering this program.
I would say mine was similar. I did not know anything about resources whatsoever. Like in my mind, I think of that show Growing Pain. I think it was Growing Pains. Was it Growing Pains where the dad was the
Mhm.
he worked from home. That didn't seem even plausible whatsoever. I think that was really growing up, like that was like my only insight whatsoever. Um to the profession, but understanding beyond that from a TV show, I had no understanding. And I thought also that it was for people with money. Only people with money would seek out assistance with mental health, but that's it. Very, very limited exposure.
Me too, the same. Just is a way of life. You think your life is a way of life until at some point you realize like it shouldn't be like this. But back then, I didn't know there was resources or that I could even access resources. I never thought about
And I already said it earlier, same. I didn't have any clue of what was available to access, and only thought people that actually had real like problems needed mental health, you know. So that's obviously changed. So
Yeah. I think when I was growing up, there was I wouldn't say a big push at school, but there was a few things that happened, and they would always have like the guidance counselors, and then they'd bring in therapists sometimes. But other than that, and aside from like my mom saying stuff, I wouldn't know like where to go outside of those two sources to get help if I needed help in that sense. So, yeah.
let's move on to the next one. How do you think that mental health stigma can contribute to cross-cultural barriers to care? Like, I think we mentioned a lot of them, like just the way we've all grown up, how we were raised with the thoughts of mental health. Like, you don't need it, push through. Like, when we're dealing with working with clients that have those same views, I mean, we can obviously relate to them on some level.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah, and
it's like,
it.
oh, go ahead.
just
Oh,
understanding
sorry.
maybe other cultures, like how their stigmas might differ from your own, and providing quality of care by understanding that their stigmas might be like different than ours.
Mhm.
So what's acceptable in that culture, what they view as not acceptable, like what the stigma is, and how that might differ from what we think or what we grew up thinking, so that we can kind of be sensitive to that and provide responsible care. But
Yeah.
I
When I
think
think about, no, go ahead.
uh, uh, I think we mentioned that it felt like an affluent person's process. And I remember going to my mom's therapist's office, and it was in downtown, and it was really nice, and it was fancy, and it was up an elevator, and it was so removed from the type of home that I lived in. I lived in like a really old home, cramped, cluttered, like 100-year-old home. So it did feel very much removed and completely unrelatable as a child seeing that. So yeah, there was definitely cultural barriers there.
Yeah, I was thinking that, you know, as more people are aware of in aware of mental health and getting access and getting the help that they need. But where we think about the relational aspect of it for their family and trying to bring their family in. So there might be like someone that you're trying to help. They're on board and then they're trying to bring their family along into therapy. But that stigma, right, is that the rest of the family has is keeping them from participating and for that individual to get the full buy-in from the family. And those are the kind of things that we're going to have to unfortunately work with, like how do we help them convince their family members to come and participate in therapy, because that is going to be a barrier. You might have one member, you might have two members, but what about the rest of the family?
Yeah. I think that's a really great point that you brought up actually, because that happens a lot. Um, and I think that like you guys were saying how we have to be mindful of our clients having different barriers than we do, but also there might be times where they have the same ones. And so then we can relate on with them on a different level and I guess be even more empathetic in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read the last one here, and sorry. How do you think that your own exposure to mental health stigma may influence your ability to prioritize self-care once you start seeing clients? I'll go first so I can take some notes on this one as well. But since I've started this program, it's been hard, like prioritizing self-care, just being a wife and a mom. Like you're already taking care of people all the time already. So it's hard to like prioritize it in your day to set time aside for yourself, no matter what it is, quiet time or a walk, whatever. It's been hard, but I've been trying to gradually implement it before starting practicum because I know it's only going to get harder, like when we start seeing clients. But it's a process, I think. You just have to take it one day at a time and just know that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
be a process. And I have to figure out like what self-care means. In the lecture, it was kind of cool. It was mentioned like even just saying at noon, you make an hour to have lunch or just a lunch break, whatever you want to do in that lunch break. Because the funny story is I don't know, it's Monday. Before work, I was running to Trader Joe's and I was talking to the guy at Trader Joe's and I'm like, yeah, it's time for myself. Like I'm grocery shopping. And he like told me, he's like, that's not really like time for yourself. Like you're buying groceries for your family. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like this isn't considered like my time necessarily because I'm shopping for my entire family. It's not like really enjoyable for me to like go to Trader Joe's and like then unload all the groceries. Like that's not really considered my time. So trying to understand like, okay, that hour of going to Trader Joe's is maybe not necessarily like taking care of myself, even though I'm not at home tending to my kids or my husband, or I'm not at like my job or doing school. So figuring out like what that means, I think for me, because I had that maybe a little bit wrong. I was like, yeah, I'm going grocery shopping. I got a break.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's interesting because before starting this program, I felt like I had it. I had it down, to the point I remember one of my girlfriends, she was like, "Oh, don't you feel guilty leaving the kids at home and going, when her and I would go hike or whatever." And I look at her like, "No, not at all." Like I do more than enough. I don't feel guilty. But since starting this program, trying to be a wife, trying to be a mother, working full time, doing this as well. Now I feel guilty because I'm not spending as much time with them, and that part is really hard. I'm working on it, and I'm trying to utilize my family more. Like my mother-in-law, she wants to spend time with the kids, so let her go pick the kids up from school, create an hour for myself just to go to the gym or do something, some form of self-care. But it's hard because I feel like I'm not there for them as much as before. I feel it.
I feel the same about having the demands from my family and needing to fit them in because I work, school, family, and then I want to be lazy. I love being lazy. So it's hard to find a moment to be lazy because I know that to be productive, time management is really important for me. And I also lately been reminding myself that I feel good when I do my assignments on time. I
Hmm.
feel good when I accomplish this and that. So maybe instead of stressing about not getting it done, I'm going to focus on get it done and then feel good about it. I don't know. But I have been thrown off my center since starting school. It's hard to find time for myself, but I do make time and I've made that a priority. So
That's good. I'm the only one that doesn't have kids, so I don't know how you guys do it because I work a full-time job and then I'm in school too, and I can barely find enough time between self-care and doing all these other things. And so for me right now, my self-care is just working out every day for an hour. So we'll see how that goes when I try to figure out practicum with work. But I mean, it's important, so at least we're trying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's great for stress relief too. That's what I'm trying to think. Get more exercise in to let some stress out when practicum
Right.
starts. I know it's going to be stressful. But yeah. All right, guys. What do you think?
I think I'm gonna
I think we're
end.
good.
All right, perfect.
Mhm.
You and then oh no, hold on. Just meant to stop.